Russia in 2025 continues its war against Ukraine, spending billions on its military while its reserves are dwindling. Meanwhile, the government is raising taxes and big companies like Aeroflot are barely staying afloat. In an interview with Glavred, economist Vitaliy Shapran explained why Russia has already essentially eaten up its reserves, how OPEC plus sanctions will worsen the oil crisis in the Russian Federation, and why Russians are hiding taxes from the state. It is based on oil, the remaining reserves, and, thank God, on inertia. Economic processes have an inertial basis. The economy cannot collapse in one day. A sharp collapse is already a consequence of an acute crisis. The Russian economy had a certain margin of safety at the beginning of the invasion in 2022. Now it has come to an end. What we have been seeing since about the beginning of this year is that the war is financed by the deterioration of the internal situation in Russia. This raises questions among local elites and regional representatives of power who are elected there. If you read their local media, you will see that the situation is very complicated. Unfortunately, we only hear the echo of propaganda from the pro-Kremlin media, but even they periodically have truth that is simply impossible to hide. Because there are statistics that cannot be falsified, there are industry associations, from metallurgists to farmers, that tell the truth about the state of affairs in their areas. Therefore, when I hear positive assessments like everything is fine, taxes are growing and so on, I understand that this is achieved by selectively pulling out individual data from a negative series and their incorrect interpretation. He added, if you look at the dynamics of revenues, in June the Russians were unable to collect even 500 billion rubles from the resource tax on oil and gas. About 90% of this revenue is from oil, the rest is from gas, which now occupies a smaller share. It turned out that the prices for Russian oil rose to about $60 per barrel, but revenues in rubles with a more or less stable exchange rate did not increase, the expert said. People often ask, what about the official deficit of 3.8 trillion rubles? And you say that the hidden one is larger. How do they do it? It's simple. For example, the week before last, Kuzbass borrowed up to 10 billion rubles from Sovcombank and Sberbank. According to the budget rules of the Russian Federation, they should have applied to the federal government and received a budget loan of 3.5%. But they do not do this. Why? Because such a loan would be considered a budget deficit. And if they take a loan from state or commercial banks, this is not counted as a federal deficit because formally there are no budgetary relations and the banks finance the lack of funds. This is how they hide the real deficit, which is considerable. A similar situation is not only in Kuzbass, it has simply become a public example. He added, in this situation, people's dissatisfaction with the government is growing. It is even expected that protests will begin in Russia in the near future due to money issues.
On the night of August 13, 2025, the Ukrainian defense forces attacked and managed to hit a strategic target in the Bryansk region of Russia. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed the destruction of the Oneka oil pumping station, and there was a large-scale fire at the site of the attack. As stated in the message of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on the night of August 13, 2025, units of the missile forces and artillery, the unmanned systems forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and other components of the defense forces struck a number of important objects of the Russian troops. In the Bryansk region of the Russian Federation, the Oneka oil pumping station, which is used to supply the army of occupiers, was damaged. At the site of the impact, a large-scale fire was recorded in the area of the booster pumping station building, as well as explosions near the tank farm and the section of main and booster pumps. Oneka provides transportation of oil simultaneously for 2 oil pipelines. It has the capacity to pump 60 million tons of raw materials annually. Detailed information about the consequences of the damage is still being clarified, the statement says. The General Staff noted that the Ukrainian Defense Forces continue actions aimed at undermining the military-economic potential of the Russian Federation, in particular its supply of fuel and lubricants, in order to force the aggressor to stop the war against Ukraine. Also, as media wrote earlier, SBU drones struck at the heart of Russian missile production. The media revealed the first consequences of the attack. On August 11, long-range SBU drones attacked the production facilities of the Artemis instrument-making plant named after Plandin in the Nizhny Novgorod region of the Russian Federation. The enterprise is part of the Russian military-industrial complex and produces gyroscopic devices, control systems, onboard computers and other components, including for the Kh-32 and Kh-101 missiles.
Ukraine continued its own version of sanctions by successfully hitting Russia's main Central Asian gas pipeline. This puts not only Russia's influence in Asia under threat, but also stops the work of some of its most important military factories due to the lack of resources. In a bold escalation of its long-range strike campaign, Ukraine has struck one of the most critical arteries of Russia's gas infrastructure, the Central Asia Center pipeline. Explosions rocked the Volgograd region, knocking the pipeline out of service and forcing an indefinite shutdown. Euromaidan press media outlet says this strategic attack, confirmed by Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, not only disrupted the gas transit but also directly affected energy supplies to multiple key military-industrial facilities across Russia, dependent on energy plants that fully receive their gas from this pipeline. Among those impacted are the Demikovsky machine-building plant, MiG Aircraft Corporation, and the Magnum K ammunition factory, central players in Russia's war machine. Local emergency crews rushed to the site as Gazprom, the pipeline operator, initiated damage assessments and repairs, halting gas flow across the region. The Central Asia Center pipeline is a 4,000-kilometer-long linchpin in Russia's gas export network, designed to transport gas from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan to Russia and vice versa. This pipeline is a geopolitical leverage as it enables Russia to exert influence over Central Asian energy while simultaneously channeling gas towards its own industrial needs. It is an important tool to keep the energy networks of Russia and the Central Asian countries interlinked and interdependent. With the Nord Stream pipelines now crippled by sabotage and geopolitical isolation, and the Power of Siberia pipeline to China bearing the full hope of Russia's Asian gas strategy, the Central Asia Center pipeline became an even more vital fallback. Euromaidan press says, striking it isn't just symbolic but strategic, as Ukraine has targeted a highly vulnerable and deeply exposed piece of infrastructure. All Russian pipelines span vast, often remote terrain with limited protection, making them soft but critical targets. If Ukraine decides to repeat such attacks or target the Power of Siberia pipeline as well, the ramifications for Russia could be immense. Constant disruption of the lines due to the easy repetition of the strikes would undermine Russia's ability to pivot away from lost European markets, weaken its hold on Central Asian energy dependencies, and slash billions from its energy revenue. Euromaidan press reports. Repeated strikes could also create logistical nightmares, reduce supply reliability, and destroy investor confidence, key levers in Russia's geopolitical influence. As a result, Moscow would be hard-pressed to maintain energy flows even for domestic needs, let alone sustain the illusion of dominance in the global energy market. With drones hitting Sochi, Ryazan, Samara, and now a strategic gas pipeline, Russia's rear is on fire, both literally and figuratively. A temporary air truce would give Moscow the breathing room it desperately needs to regroup and reinforce, but few in Ukraine are ready to fall for this trap.